And good morning, Chewy, good morning, George, and good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us. Morena. How's everybody? How are you? Hey, George, we never really checked in. You were feeling a bit under the weather last week. That was all just a bit of a cold, and you got through there, and you're all right?
Yeah. I'm still regularly doing rat tests, but yeah, everything was negative. Now, I want to ask though, where the hell in my nose do I put the thing? Because I keep hearing different things.
Well,
down into the back.
According to Susie Wiles, it's low and slow.
Okay. So not up into the brain.
No. It's actually I've did a couple of them that week that we were in isolation, and that my left nostril is easier to do it than my right nostril. And you're basically it's almost like perpendicular to your face, straight back in, and find that little hole that goes up to your sinuses. And it was horrible. I mean, let's not beat around the bush. I almost couldn't do it on one of my nostrils and got it like part way in and did the little twisty thing. And
the other this is sort of like sex ed, eh? Like how many holes are up there?
I did put a condom on mine. I did that. Do you think that affected the result? There was a condom wrapped around mine just to make sure I didn't get anything.
I practiced with a banana and it didn't work very well.
You practiced with a banana for the swab, or a banana up your nose? Because that's a completely different conversation.
That's a good point. I could try the other way.
Yeah. Good for everyone to be with us. How is everyone today? Is everyone having a good day? We happy today? Happy and
good, mate.
As Guy Nespiter said yesterday, the further news reporting on the IPCA is out today in RNZ. If people want to go see that, go read that, how the police watchdog is more secretive than the spy agency, the SIS, as we learned yesterday. As Guy exclusively told us yesterday, that reporting is out on RNZ today.
Good. So let's send everyone away to a different media outlet just as we're starting the show.
I knew you were thinking that exact thing as I was saying that, Pat.
I'm cool.
I'm sorry.
It's all good. So no, and maybe, I don't know, maybe later in the week we'll get going back on, or maybe someone else there. I think there's a couple of authors that are contributing to that investigative journalism, so maybe we'll follow that up a bit more as it goes along. Today's going to be an interesting show. We are going to be talking a little bit about microplastics. I don't know too much about microplastics, but there was some research released yesterday, I think New Zealand time, that microplastics have made it into our blood. So I've heard the phrase microplastics quite often associated with marine biology and, getting into fish and people having fish for dinner and that sort of thing. And I don't know, there seems to be a disconnect between, being in a fish's stomach, microplastics, and being in our blood. And I'm wondering how that has happened. But today we're going to have on a marine biologist to talk about microplastics as a general subject. And then probably over the next wee while, we'll investigate further what it means for humans. There's my understanding as part of our guest's research talks about the changes in behavior in fish that microplastics can cause, which of course raises the question, if we have microplastics in our blood, are we going to see changes in behavior? Maybe people will start believing the science. Imagine if that was the side effect of microplastics in your blood. People start believing the science. That'd be nice. We might see the end of this pandemic, which would be a good thing. Speaking of the pandemic, also there's another bit of research out yesterday looking at the effects of long COVID. They are varied and they are plentiful. And just as a bit of a heads up, one of the effects of long COVID is it happens twice as often in women than it does in men at the moment. So we'll be having a look at the research, and we'll be getting on Dr. Anna Brooks who is from the University of Auckland. Her current research is specifically in COVID-19 and the post-viral condition long COVID. The research that came out yesterday is not her research, but obviously she's all over it and she'll be able to talk to it, and we'll have questions about that. Because if I was to say to you, should I bring up that article and just say these before we get going? If I was to say to you, in New Zealand, here are some of the situations around long COVID: fatigue, shortness of breath, cough, low moods, headaches, difficulty in concentrating, cognitive impairment or brain fog, chest pain, joint pain, muscle aches and pains, muscle weakness, ongoing changes to smell or taste, fast beating or pounding heart, sleep disturbances. If we talked about that as being some of the things, the obvious conclusion is, oh yeah, it's just like a cold, isn't it? I mean, that's the obvious conclusion when you talk about that as a possibility, one would think. So yeah, we'll be having a look at that a bit later on this hour. And George, I'm just going to check in with you now, I guess, as we are ready to go with either topic. Shall we start with microplastics? Would that be a perfectly good and easy place to start?
Yeah, let's jump to that, and then we can rearrange.
Because
Brody's here, so we can let's do that.
All right. Well, let's just welcome straight to the show from University of Otago, the Department of Marine Science, Dr. Bridie Allen. Bridie, good morning to you.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Oh, look, thanks for joining us, and it's fantastic to see you early on in the show, and we can just rip into this conversation that we're all wanting to talk about. And obviously, you are a marine biologist. You work in the marine area of study. The reason we're talking about this is the story that came out yesterday. Here's a little bit of a highlight of it from One News, talking about microplastics being found in human blood. But I suspect, and if we think about the species that are animal, in that animal kingdom, there's going to be a lot of research that you've done that could be transposable over into some conclusions potentially with what's going to happen in humans. And this is for me as well. Look, let me just set this up by saying this. I'll show you. This is our thumbnail for this morning's show. And this is the imagery I put on for microplastics because this is the imagery that came up, when I Googled it. Now, I'm assuming that this is not what we're talking about, because this this massive piece of blue plastic down here, that ain't ever getting into anyone's bloodstream, obviously. And that made me think maybe I don't understand exactly what microplastics are. So maybe just to start off with, to help us all understand a bit more, you could just let us know what we're talking about when we're talking about microplastics.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good point, I think, that you've got that image up there, because that really is what springs to mind when most people think about microplastics.
Yeah.
But microplastics, as you saw in the image, are actually quite large. Anywhere up to 5 millimeters is the general sort of cutoff, that defines a microplastic.
Wow.
Now, in the study that came out yesterday, which was really interesting and probably quite shocking, hence a lot of media attention, is probably really referring to something called nanoplastics, which are anything from 1 nanometer up to 0.001 microns. So that's the next category that's below microplastics. And as you mentioned, those are things that are the similar size to nutrients or molecules or even red blood cells, hence their ability to pass through tissues in the body.
Right. So nanoplastics would be a more accurate way of thinking about potentially what this research is talking about. Your research, I mean, I'm assuming you also see nanoplastics within the marine world as well. I mean, do you see nanoplastics in fish blood and other marine life within their blood system as well?
Yeah, I haven't looked at that specifically, but the way I like to think about it is macroplastics turn into microplastics turn into nanoplastics through time. It's kind of like this iterative process of degradation. We typically work with microplastics because they're a lot easier to work with experimentally because they are larger. Nanoplastics are extremely difficult to work with. And so I'm not aware of too many studies that in a similar research field of my own, but there are studies out there that do show that they do pass into the blood system of fish, for example, or into the brains of fish. And have various impacts, but it's always at nanoplastic size.
I'm interested in your research and what you've found, what the effects that microplastics actually have on animals.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've done quite a lot of work on marine fish from tropical ecosystems, so coral reef fish, to fish here in New Zealand, kingfish, or even small triple fins, which are common here in Otago. And what we've found sort of consistently across all those different systems is that exposure to microplastics causes something called oxidative stress, which is a situation that arises when an animal ingests something toxic or is exposed to some sort of environmental stressor. And it seems really common across various fish species, and that comes at a real cost to energetics as well as to fitness, because it can lead to things like cell death or tissue damage. We've also seen changes in behavior, but mostly we're seeing consistent physiological changes rather than consistent changes in behavior.
So when, Bridie, when you talk about those changes, you're saying they're not consistent? Is it like behavior as in, I don't know, movement of the fish, or like their eating habits, or Yeah,
there's a lot of things you can measure with behavior, right? But often underpinning behavior is a physiological change first. So that's usually what happens that then might lead the fish to behave in a different way. And typical behaviors that we look at are things like the way they respond to predators. So look at their escape performance, but also the way in which they interact with their habitat as well. And we have shown with coral reef fish that they will suffer higher mortality rates after they've been exposed to plastics. We're not sure of the exact mechanism of that, but it could be due to something called false satiation. When you consume plastic particles, you feel like you're full, but you've got no nutritional value from those. And so your behavior changes in such a way that you just try and feed more and more frequently and increase your conspicuousness to predators, really, which likely leads to the increase in predation rates.
It's
sorry.
absolutely terrifying considering how much marine animals we consume and the effect that would have on us over a lifetime. And we're only really scratching the surface of this now. That's terrifying.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of studies globally that have shown that microplastics are making their way into our food sources. So fish that we buy, for example. But a lot of it's looking at what's found in the gut of those fish. And we typically don't buy fish with the gut intact. But things like bivalves, organisms, or anchovies or sardines, things that you consume whole with the gut intact, that's likely a path of us ingesting plastics as well. But it's really difficult to find out what the impacts are on humans just because of the difficulties in getting samples, which I think is why that study that was published yesterday was so interesting and got a lot of attention. So yeah, I think it'd be great if that study increased the replication, just to see how common that is across a larger sample size. I think that'd be pretty interesting.
There was they surveyed, so it was in the Environment International Journal. They surveyed 22 people and found microplastics in the blood of 17. So I guess quite small. Now, Bridie, I know that you deal with marine animals, but can you start to sort of extrapolate and speculate on how you might see the changes you've identified in marine animals reproduced in humans? If we were just to make the assumption that there would be changes to humans, what sort of things might we see in behavior?
Yeah, it's interesting because we all, as scientists, you extrapolate a little bit, but you're warned against speculating, of course. And so it's difficult. Zebrafish research, of course, is designed as a sort of model organism that you can potentially translate those effects into a human model system. In terms of the work I do, I'm not sure I would see any gross changes in behavior in humans. But interestingly, and Sally Gore raised this in the media last night, that there's a lot of chemicals that are bound into plastics themselves. It's not necessarily the physical impact of ingesting those particles, but it's the chemicals that you find within them. So things like phthalates, which are plasticizers, which are used to increase longevity and the flexibility of the plastic itself. And they're really known as endocrine disruptors, particularly affecting things like reproductive hormones. And indeed, there was a study that came out of Taiwan some years ago about male workers working in a PVC factory, inhaling a lot of airborne microplastics or really nanoplastics. And they sort of correlated that with decreases in sperm motility and sperm activity through time, which would have obvious implications potentially on reproductive rates. And we see a little bit of impacts with plastics and plasticizers in our fish in terms of reproduction, but the jury's still out and we haven't really found anything that's entirely conclusive at this stage, but we are working on it.
I'm also wondering the real specifics of from how we get it in our blood. Because like I've always said, eating sardines is evil. I mean, we all can agree to that. So that's not going to be how it's getting in my blood. But are we getting them in our blood from our interactions with plastics, or we're eating things with it in their blood or in their system and it's passing through membranes into our blood? How's that all actually happening full stop?
Yeah, it's an interesting point, and it's probably a combination of both things, right? You have primary ingestion of plastics, which is when you will consume plastics yourself, and then secondary ingestion of plastics, which is when you consume something that's consumed plastics. And you see that a lot in the FIS literature, in terms of like, is it primary ingestion or secondary ingestion? Right. And to be honest, for human consumers, it's probably a combination of both. I'm sure that Sally yesterday raised that we all have carpet in our house. It's often composed of nylon in part as well as wool. But we're all using plastic products all the time. And so, there's reports out there to suggest that, estimates that we might consume around a credit card of plastic every single year. Most of that would just pass through us. It'll pass through our digestive tract and be released. What would probably happen during that time, or what may happen during that time, is that we might get leaching of chemicals that are within those plastics as well. And that's what causes damage to hormones and things like that, as I described earlier. But in terms of secondary ingestion of plastics, if you're consuming other organisms that have eaten plastic, it's really difficult to know, and it's extremely variable. Right. It's particularly in the marine environment, you might get a change in the prevailing wind conditions, for example, and that's going to bring a lot of plastic out of the pelagic environment. And so I think when you're thinking about plastic entering our food chain, it depends on a lot of different things. Waste management practices in the country, population size, but also oceanography plays a major part in that as well.
Brodie, what in your research, maybe giving you a chance to sort of maybe mention any non-microplastics research or things that you're interested in, specifically with New Zealand, right? Like, what do you see as maybe one of the main challenges to marine life in New Zealand in a general sense, and maybe some shortcomings around, regulation or restrictions and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think, the marine environment's facing multiple threats, right? There's global climate change, which is, of course, ocean acidification, ocean warming. That's a global stressor, but then overlaid on top of that are local stresses. And these local stresses can change depending on where you are. For example, in Otago, we have problems with sedimentation, but also things like invasive species, pollutants, oil pollution, plastic pollution, of course. But, if I was going to pick a stressor that I would be most concerned about in the marine environment in the future, it would certainly be global warming and increasing frequency of marine heat waves. And there's been a lot of chat in the media about the plastic issue sort of detracting away from the importance of people considering global warming and ocean acidification. But it's really just a suite of stressors that will all interact together. They're not acting individually. They're going to interact together and create effects that might be of greater magnitude than if the organisms are exposed to those stresses individually. So that would be the one that I would want to get some sort of control on. But global warming, how do we as consumers deal with that and change our processes?
I have a bit of a random question, but you've seen changes in behavior in marine life because of microplastics. Have any of those changes been positive? And I was thinking, and it's not the same thing, but I was thinking about toxoplasmosis. Plasmosis, I think that's what it is. And how that obviously, for some reason within behavior, reduces risk factor. And if you read some writings on it, it says things like promotes entrepreneurship. Obviously, that means the risk factor of someone has gone down. It's a strange way to say it, but apparently more entrepreneurs have toxoplasmosis than the general population, sort of thing. And whether that's positive or not, I don't know. But I'm just saying, is there anything that you've seen within this kind of terrible news of microplastics in the marine world that has ended up helping the behaviors within that marine world?
I can't think of any studies in the marine literature that have suggested some sort of benefit to plastic pollution. I guess, if we think about tiny organisms like microorganisms, anything that's, around 100 microns in size or smaller. All of this debris in the environment, this plastic debris, creates a unique sort of habitat for those sorts of organisms, transporting them around the world. And that's been sort of recognized as a new ecological niche called the plastosphere. I guess that's a benefit for those small organisms. But, it's a double-edged sword, right? It could also transport pathogenic organisms as well. So, I can't think of any real obvious benefits to plastic pollution.
I get it. Stupid question, but I wanted to ask it anyway.
No, it was interesting.
Anything else, George and Shelly?
I'm good. I just wanted to note before, that, sorry, stealing the screen from you, Pat, that there are these, that DuPont put, stuff in pretty much every person's bloodstream. They didn't inject it in there, but in terms of their sort of waste from their chemical processes, you can't find anyone in the world without what is it, PFAS in their bloodstream now, right? And so I think we have to, this is just a great example of how we need to, we need better protections, we need better accountability if we're going to, stop this from happening again with microplastics. So I just wanted to remind our viewers about DuPont and forever chemicals.
It is a bit crazy that one, because you think about having, like the people who are living their healthiest life, maybe they're catching and cooking all their own food and growing it, and even those people are going to be impacted by what's put into the environment, so no one can get away from it. Sorry, Chewie, you go, mate.
I was just saying, I remember there was a raft of products a few years ago, exfoliating microbeads in face care and body scrubs and all of that sort of stuff. And I just remember thinking, when I saw those, I was like, that doesn't sound like a good idea. We're just putting billions and billions of tiny little plastic beads into the water system. Not great.
Yeah, it's quite remarkable, really, what gets out into the consumer market. But luckily, a lot of countries have banned those products, and others are opting for voluntary phase outs. But, plastic, there's a reason why plastic's everywhere. It's such a great product. And it has been since, it was very first commercially developed in the early 1900s and 1940s. So, there's small things you can do as an individual to reduce your plastic intake. Not heating in plastic containers. It's a really simple fix. Those chemicals that are in those containers, they leach out at around 24 degrees. About half of the chemicals will leach out, and then it's relatively stable after that. And that's a big dose of, quite significant chemicals to take into your food source.
Hey, Bridie, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
No problem.
Really
Thanks for having me.
No.
Yeah, thanks, Bridie.
Awesome. It was really interesting to get your take, and we appreciate you giving us some time. Dr. Bridie Allen from the Department of Marine Science at the University of Otago. I'm sure we'll talk to you again sometime.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
See ya.
I think about when I see us in the screen setting with four of us. Or was it the Partridge Family? They had all those things. They all look sideways and they do that kind of thing. That's what I think when I get this sort of vibe as well. Hey, before 11 o'clock, we are going to have a look. There is new breaking news coming out. We've said this before. It's the biggest news story in the world at the moment. It's also one of the least important. But Jada Pinkett Smith has just broken her silence. We'll have a look at that before 11 o'clock. before 11 o'clock, because right up there with the importance of Jada Pinkett Smith, we've also got the importance of commentary from Duncan Garner. I think we should definitely look at that as well. Let's have a look at something that Chloe Swarbrick, Green MP, and also the MP for Auckland Central, has put out there, and the Auckland City Council has got behind. That has then had commentary from Duncan Garner of Today FM, and I'd like for us to have a bit of a squiz at it, a bit of a look over it. So Auckland City Council supports members' bill to end advertising in sport. And I'll read a little bit of this for people who are, well, everyone's watching, but you'll get the gist of it. Auckland Council has voted unanimously to support a private member's bill aiming to ban alcohol companies from advertising in sport. The bill, which was put forward by Chloe Swarbrick, would amend the sale and supply of alcohol to provide more controls around liquor marketing. It wants to reduce young people's exposure to messages encouraging them to drink and remove the link between sport and alcohol This includes prohibiting all liquor advertising from, in, or around venues and during broadcasts, banning alcohol companies from sponsoring the name of teams or players, and removing the brand names from merchandise, uniforms, and equipments. Now, many will probably think, well, whether we particularly care about advertising with alcohol or not, it seems a logical flow on from banning tobacco sponsorship. I mean, whether you agree or disagree, I think most would at least acknowledge it seems at some stage to be a logical flow on from that. At least I would. I don't know if you guys are the same, but I certainly would.
Yeah.
I want to have a look at commentary made by Duncan Garner yesterday from Today FM, new radio station in New Zealand, setting themselves kind of up as the antithesis to Newstalk ZB. In fact, I've heard from several people that management through there have basically and overtly said if ZB wouldn't touch it, we'll be interested in it. They're trying to make themselves more the kind of everyman station, pulling in people from all sorts of walks of life to be able to get content from them, which I got to say, from someone with 20 years radio experience, sounds really exciting. Whether it will work or not, I don't know. I know that the group that owns Today FM Media Works not that long ago were saying, and I know this because it was said to me, that conservative talk is the way forward. This is not that, but that certainly was the model within talk radio up until this station came out, actually.
Well, it seems like the original premise was that we're not going to be conservative talkback radio, but then, as we're going to see, Duncan Garner is basically doing the old reactionary radio stuff, right?
Well, I mean, what I would say is it's reactionary radio if he doesn't believe it. I mean, I always think about reactionary stuff being people playing a game or, devil's advocate or that kind of thing. If this is Duncan Garner's position, then it's not him being reactionary, it's him offering a position. Now, it's always the difference. Like I used to say, I didn't do controversial talk when I did talkback, but that doesn't mean my talk didn't create controversy. There's a difference. I think doing it to be controversial is different from doing something that was controversial. So I don't know whether he's being reactionary or whether the subject matter just is. You know what I'm saying?
Sorry, I should have used a different word because I mean reactionary in terms of being conservative, right? In terms of in terms of reacting negatively to any idea, right? In terms of conservatism as opposed to progressivism.
And I guess there is, when you talk about reacting to any idea, I think about whataboutisms.
Exactly.
You do get the vibe in this of whataboutisms, and we'll pause as we're doing this to show you. But a whataboutism is basically someone going, well, why are we going to do that? I mean, what about this? Basically, it's a way to go, I want to put up a contrarian opinion about something else by mentioning another thing that should also be sorted out. And if you don't sort out the other thing, then what's the point in sorting out this thing?
That's the classic one.
Yeah, whataboutism it's called. Right, let's have a bit of a listen, show. This is Duncan Garner yesterday on his 9 till midday show on Today FM, 96.6 in Dunedin. You talking specifically about the Chloe Swarbrick proposal, I guess, bill, supported by the council.
Sticky Beaks, Auckland Council, goes where the council has never been before. They have voted for and supported.
I'm going to pause already. Goes where the council has never been before. Is what Duncan Garner saying is we cannot go places the council hasn't been before. I'll just refer back to banning of tobacco sales. At one point, that was going to where a group had never been before. Just a point.
Supported an MP's private members bill for the first time. This is Chloe Swarbrick, the Green MP. Her half-baked idea to ban alcohol companies advertising in sport. So no booze company signage at venues. No sponsorship of equipment or gear, nothing. A blanket ban. It all involves sport. This is what she wants. 100% socially responsible. In the ideal world, perfect. Absolutely perfect. 100% dumb, in my view. It is 100% social engineering, isn't it? 100% anti-business. And I think it would have a detrimental effect on kids in sport.
So there's the conservative talking points. We hear a lot in American sport. American conversation about talking points. Those are the talking points. Those are the talking points that this is a left-wing politician, so therefore this is social engineering and it's anti-business. Is it? And what I always say to these sorts of commentaries is, where is your evidence? And as we go through this, there'll be 3 other points, I think, where I go, where is the evidence of that? So anything to you guys to add before we go on?
Oh, everything's social engineering. Everything.
Yeah. If I don't agree with it, it's social engineering. All right, let's keep going.
What do we need right now? We need kids playing sport. Let's get out there. If we could start the competitions this weekend, just go for it. We've all been at home for far too long and come up with ideas like this. What's the council doing? And what are they thinking?
I do. Sorry, boss. I do like the tone. It's so, oh, what are they doing?
Won't someone think of the children? The children.
This does sort of, yeah. It's sort of like he's workshopping. He's like trying to figure out if the scripted monologue is where he wants to go, or if you have the scripted monologue but you try and make it sound like it's off the cuff, like, you know, that tension that you sometimes have. Like, there's a style on YouTube, sometimes narrators will purposely put in a pause so it doesn't sound scripted, but then it sounds like a scripted pause or a scripted
Let me also just say here, I just think we see the same thing at the same time. I think that I'm not about beating up on this media outlet, Today FM. I'm actually quite excited about what they could do. This is specifically a commentary on us commenting on this one person's opinion piece. Now, if tomorrow Duncan does the world's most amazing opinion piece, we will highlight that as well. You know, it's like this is nothing but a commentary on something that I think we're all in agreement, because I brought this to the table this morning, is utterly ridiculous and missing the mark on so many ways. And when we get to the end of this, you'll see. So if you're with us, don't turn off, because you'll see when we get to the end how ridiculous this is. Let's keep going.
Chloe Swarbrick doesn't live in the real world. And the council and their run seem to be doing the right thing.
She lives in the metaverse. Just in case anyone's wondering, it's not the real world.
Has gone where no council ever has gone before. That is to support a private member's bill. Is it even for them to support and vote on? No, it's not. It's for the parliament. Firstly, if they think this will promote healthy and better kids, get real. Kids.
But hang on. Is that what they're saying? Are we wanting to remove harm, which means we're promoting healthy and better kids, or are we just removing harm? You know what I'm saying? Like, is he jumping? Is it just me, or is he jumping a little bit there to saying, you know, if you're going to remove this, you must also have a direct path to healthy and better kids immediately? I mean,
he's linking it to kids. It's literally, why won't someone think of the children?
Yeah.
But this isn't about the children. It's alcohol-related harm in its entirety.
Yeah.
New Zealand's drinking culture is atrocious, and it's always been linked to sport.
But I think I think whether you agree or disagree with the policy idea, I think Chloe Swarbrick, who's coming on tomorrow, by the way, would probably say we are thinking of the children. That's actually what we're doing. We're trying to remove the connection between alcohol and sport for the children. So we'll get that tomorrow. So join us tomorrow for that.
They're more likely to be influenced by their father at home having a beer on his knee in the afternoon than Lion Red being on the back of the shorts or rugby jerseys.
True, but there's your first example about whataboutism. You know, if dad at home's not going to stop drinking beer, then we might as well. What about dad? You know, what about dad at home drinking beer? It's not going to make any difference. It's true. More influence from the parents, I agree with them, but that's your first example of whataboutism.
But has dad been influenced?
Sponsorship, to ban alcohol from sports sponsorship, is not well thought through, in my view.
Much like this monologue.
And who's coming to the party otherwise? Who's lining up to sponsor these club rugby teams, club netball teams, club sports teams, kids sport? Who's there?
So the reason that alcohol groups sponsor these sporting teams and stuff is because it's a good sponsorship deal. Now, Duncan's posing a question that has no answer, but he's doing it in a kind of fear and loathing kind of way. Because what he's saying is there's no one else to do this. Now, if this is worthwhile for these companies to do, then it's worthwhile for other companies to do as well. And let's not get this twisted. Companies who have boards and shareholders are not altruistic, because they have an absolute duty to create profit for their shareholders and for their, for their company overall. They're by law, they need to do it. So a decision is made not altruistically, but on a financial basis. And if we're saying that these companies are getting nothing for this, therefore they're giving their money away with no expectations, that's where we're getting to the point of this is a bit of a ludicrous thing that's being said.
Which businesses are willing to take over? I accept booze and sport are too often linked, but this is primarily discriminatory against sport. It targets
discriminatory.
Sport. What about leaflets that come in your
whataboutisms
mailbox?
Here we go.
Oh, they're okay. What do you mean they're okay? Oh, this is targeting sport only. Billboards on the side of the motorway, fine. The kids can see those, but just not have it on the back of sports jerseys.
Yeah.
Or at the sports ground.
Yeah, where their heroes are wearing
I
them.
think this will decimate some sports and will leave everybody worse off. It discriminates against sport, and sport's crucial. It's so narrow-minded, and there's no guarantee it would work anyway. Do you think it would work? 0800 863 293. And are you worried about booze in sport? Here's an idea. And this can be blamed right at the feet of the council. Don't allow liquor shops within 1K of a school.
Good idea.
For as long as booze shops.
Well, this is hand up. Cool. I'm down. All right. Now, if he's doing another whataboutism, like, well, if the liquor shops are so let's not worry, then that to me is what he's doing another what. But I'm down. Okay, cool. I'm on board. So Duncan Garner's hopefully going to be the front person for that. Awesome.
I love it when they stumble onto a good point.
You can't go banning booze companies from supporting sport. You just can't. The council, especially in Auckland, has rubber stamped the rise of the booze shops in Auckland. In the Onehunga ward alone, 108 on and off licenses exist. 108.
We're going to step forward, I think, a bit here, guys, just to get to the end of it.
And across the road from school. Kids don't feel like drinking booze because they're at a club engineering. Pass and cycleways and stay away from this misguided social engineering.
Oh, we got into the cycleways as well.
Drinking booze because they're at a club rugby game and TUI signages on the post or at the end of the field.
So this is the bit that it's going to get into the conversation we'll have after it. Duncan Garner is saying the advertising doesn't work. He's saying if there's a TUI billboard, there's a TUI billboard on the side, it's not influencing the kids at all. So he's saying this advertising doesn't work. He's saying the money that TUI is putting into that club, the money that TUI is putting into there doesn't work. Now, we'll get to the obvious point shortly. Remember where Duncan Garner is right now. He's working for a commercial radio station, and he started to say advertising doesn't work.
They want to meet pie and lollies. They do. They want to meet pie and lollies. That's why I take $5 notes to the games. If they'll take a 20, they'll never give you the change. This will decimate sport at all levels. It would mean no Heineken Open in Auckland.
Okay, so there's the other thing. Who says? So that's a statement that's just made, that Duncan Garner's just made, that goes, this is the end of that professional tennis. Why? Who says that? There's no evidence for that, Mr. Garner. Show me your evidence.
See, the Heineken Open. You rush to the Heineken Open to drink Heineken or to watch tennis. Yet all this is happening. So this is actually really happening. This council has voted for this. Parliament has to vote for it, of course. But all this happens as we watch the rise of vape shops on every corner. 3 of them in one block of shops in Dominion Road alone.
Whataboutism?
Oh, the vapes, they're good for teenagers. Chloe Swarbrick's thinking, I think, is madness. And it doesn't make sense. Here's why.
And we don't have the next part of that conversation, but I'll tell you what he went on to say. And it's interesting that it's been cut off, right? Because what he went on to say, because they've got his script up right here. He says, here's why. Dun, 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 dun.
I love that it's a Q&A.
Yep. Question. For example, question. This is what Duncan Garner said. Question. Ever rushed off to Macca's because someone mentioned Starship's Ronald McDonald House? Exactly. Never. And this one here is a very important one. Does watching the Sky City Breakers make you gamble? Never. Not once. Okay. The last one is, okay, we haven't done this yet with you, Chewy, all right? So I'll ask you the question. What's the beer that's been associated with the All Blacks for the past 30 years?
Steinlager.
Yeah. So we all know. No one went, I couldn't remember. Do you know why? Because sponsorship works and advertising works. But what? Hey. Well, let me get this clear. Let me get this point. This is a really important point. Does watching the Sky City Breakers make you gamble? He says never, not once. What he's saying is advertising doesn't work. What Duncan Garner is saying as he works for a brand new commercial radio station, is advertisers out there. The money you guys are spending is not going to influence the people who are listening to this show. Why do you think Sky City sponsors the Breakers? Because they want to see a return for it. They want people to associate Sky City Casino, Sky City Restaurants, Sky City Hotel with that professional sporting outfit. If I wonder if the end of that commentary had been cut off because someone in management realized, hang on, if we say that Sky City that person to do it. Have you got some more there, George? Oh, that's me. Did you grab my page or did I grab my page? I haven't touched anything.
No, I didn't do anything either. My thing went a bit funny though.
Crazy. So listen, let me just say that again. Duncan Garner is overtly saying Sky City is wasting their money sponsoring the Breakers because they will get no return on it. And my question is, what about all the advertisers on Today FM? If Duncan Garner is saying that sponsoring products doesn't make people want more of those products, advertising doesn't influence people into getting that advert, he's working for a commercial radio station. His salary is paid by advertisers paying for advertising on his show and others, trying to influence the audience to buy or use their products. Chewy, go.
I was just going to say his understanding of how advertising influences people is completely out of whack as well. Nobody rushes out. Oh, I've just heard an ad about McDonald's. I better go get a burger. It's a soft little nudge. It's a reminder that this business exists. This is one of your choices that you have. You know, I just like yourself, Pat, I've worked in radio advertising. The idea of repetition is king. You know, it takes 3 or 4 mentions for a business or a product to sink into someone's mind. If you're watching a rugby game for an hour and you're constantly seeing those billboards, that soft nudge of like, hey, you're enjoying this and it's associated with our product, maybe you'll enjoy our product as well. That's why it's worked. There's a reason that we banned tobacco advertising with sport so many years ago. It's the same thing. We know this product is harmful.
Hang on. If advertising doesn't work and if Sky City Breakers doesn't influence anyone to gamble, then surely Duncan's logical conclusion would be we should definitely bring back the Winfield Cup for rugby league. We should definitely put tobacco back into advertising because he's saying, and I'm not even inferring what he's saying, he's literally saying the people who watch the Sky City Breakers are not influenced to go to Sky City and gamble. Therefore, the people who are watching the Winfield Cup are not going to be influenced to pick up a cigarette. So therefore, Duncan is saying either one of two things. Advertising doesn't work or any advertising should be allowed. They're the only two logical conclusions. And both of those conclusions, while you're working for a brand new commercial radio station, I think are potentially slightly problematic.
It's hilarious to scream social bloody engineering when, you know, why he is gripping so hard to this idea of alcohol in sports is because of decades and decades of advertising agencies building that connection, building that cultural connection between sport, whatever sport it may be, and ciggies and booze.
I don't know if he's got a particular sponsor for his show, but if he did have a sponsor for his show, I wonder how they would feel hearing him say this massive sponsorship deal that the Breakers have will not influence people to go to Sky City. And as you said, Chewy, how marketing works, it's repetition. So it's not necessarily you walk out the door of the Sky City Breakers game and head off to the casino. It's, oh, hon, I feel like going out for dinner tonight. Where should we go? Hey, I've heard that Sky City has got some amazing restaurants. Why don't we go there? Oh, yeah, okay. Or it's a stag do and going, what should we do? Hey, I've always wanted to go to the casino. I mean, we'll take $20 and we'll lose it all. It'll just be a night out. You know, I think perhaps what you've seen is disingenuous talkback setups at their finest. And I'll say so. I know something about them because I actually, if I was to put my hat in a particular court, he doesn't believe what he's saying. And if you don't believe what you're saying, you don't get authentic conversations. And if you don't get authentic conversations, you're playing a role. And if you're playing a role, it's the worst kind of radio. Now, again, let me be really clear. I mean, I know people who work there. I'm not criticizing the actual group. I'm not criticizing the intention for what they want to do. But in that one moment, for that one commentary, it's pretty ridiculous.
Yeah. Can I just also say, he's talking about the detrimental effects to kids in sport, suddenly there won't be any money because sponsors are pulling out and that sort of thing. Maybe we should be thinking of different ways to fund sport, whether it be kids sport or older sport. Maybe we should be getting together as a country and funding sport rather than relying on them to have to chase after sponsorship. But
just remember a couple of things. Drawing conclusions you have no evidence of. The Heineken Open is going to disappear. Or playing whataboutisms. Why would we do anything about alcohol in sport? I mean, look, there's liquor stores. There are two things that are disingenuous, don't add to the conversation, and are a classic tool of talkback radio.
Yeah.
All right, guys. We are going to move on. There was a new study released, I think yesterday, New Zealand time. Let's bring it up on the screen. Talking about long COVID, it found that 3 in 4 people who were hospitalized with coronavirus reported experiencing at least one long-term COVID symptom, which varied depending on which variant they caught. The research found that 76% reported at least one persistent symptom. 37% were chronic fatigue, 37% were shortness of breath. 36% were chronic fatigue. And they also found in the survey that type 2 diabetes appeared to have a lower risk of developing long COVID symptoms. Yeah, so I guess the thing about studying long COVID is you need a long time. It's like the results can't come out the day after COVID exists. And I guess what we're finding is, now we are being taught and told about what's happening with COVID, what's happening with long COVID. And we're going to invite into the show Dr. Anna Brooks from the University of Auckland. Her current research, if we want to get an expert, Chewy, her current research is COVID-19 and the post-viral condition, long COVID. Who could be better to talk to about this than Dr. Anna Brooks? Dr. Brooks, thanks for joining us this morning. I appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, I love it, man. So tell us, this research that came out yesterday, one of the also findings that we didn't talk about was the actual headline that women are twice as likely to be affected as men by long COVID. What do you want to you can just speak to the study that came out. What have you, because it's not your study, but you're an expert in looking into these things. What did you learn from it? Were there things that were shocking to you that we need to know about?
Yeah, so, I mean, as you've just mentioned, we need a lot of time post-COVID, to launch these studies and understand, what it all means. And so we've learned a lot from each of the different variants and, and what sort of comes from that. But it's also important to, reflect on that moving forward, that now we're with a variant that we have no information on. So what we learned from, these studies coming out, a lot of them were from the earlier variants. We've heard previous months, the long-term effects on the brain, the long-term effects, that you've got an increased cardiac risk, and all of these things coming through. A lot of those studies were from the first variant, or even at a time where we weren't vaccinated. So as we move forward, we always have to reflect on these studies to sort of see, what can we learn from this study, but also what do we still not know about our current situation. And that's really, really important. And in many aspects. For example, we knew that the vaccination reduced your risks of long COVID from Delta, but we don't know what your risk profile looks like with when you're fully vaccinated, fully boosted, you get Omicron. We have no data on how many people are going to get long COVID because it only kicked off late November.
Yeah. And look, I one of the things we've been doing in the show a lot is sort of the philosophy of leading a horse to water. I mean, we can't make them drink. We can't say, you should accept the science. But whilst we're talking about this, in the same article from News Hub, they listed some of the common long COVID I can say side effects, symptoms.
Yeah.
And while we're talking about it, I just wanted to put this out there.
Mhm.
Like long COVID symptoms include fatigue, shortness of breath, a cough, low mood, headaches, difficulty concentrating, cognitive impairment or brain fog, chest pain, joint pain, muscles aches and pains, muscle weakness, ongoing changes to smell or taste, fast beating or a pounding heart, and sleep disturbances. So once again, under that auspice of leading a horse to water, that doesn't sound like something that is quote unquote just a cold, because I've never heard of just a cold that can do any of these things. Can I ask you as well, from your research and from what we're finding out, long COVID, obviously it describes a length. Do we know the length yet? Like, could someone have headaches, difficulty concentrating for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months for the rest of their lives? Do we have any data on that?
We absolutely know that, yes, people can recover. So just like you've described, you might have these symptoms for 3 months, for 6 months, for a year, or maybe longer. But what we're sort of hearing, especially working with the international patient groups, many, here we are, 2 years post-infection, and they have not recovered. And some people are getting worse in their symptoms. So that's what sort of the key aspect of awareness right now is, that we hope by spreading this message to, listen to your body and watch for these symptoms, is that we hope to get more people through, recover after 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, by spreading that awareness that we know that resting certainly helps. We don't have a magic pill. We don't have a magic answer, but we do know what we do know has come through patient engagement. And sometimes what people have told us is that they reflect upon their illness and they sort of say, it could have been that very stressful time in my life where I pushed myself. People who recognize those symptoms, like you're overtired, but, and tired is not really the right description here, but that's, a hint. Even if you're a little bit more tired, that could start escalating into this extreme debilitating fatigue. Fatigue doesn't mean just a bit tired, but once you start to notice those symptoms, that going back to your normal activities, you're not feeling the same, then that's a warning sign to take it easy. And we hope that if you take it easy, you may be one of those people that recover at 3 months, 6 months, a year. So it's a very difficult condition to sort of walk your way through, because we don't have enough information, because internationally, or around the world, there's been very little spotlight on this condition, because it's all about the infection itself and the contagious part. There's been very little emphasis on the post-acute phase, as we call it, or the debilitation that comes thereafter. So that's why we want to get the message out there. We really hope that these symptoms will be a short term for some, but again, Omicron's new. We don't know enough about on the international stage as to, how many people will be permanently like this, because we know that post-viral illnesses can lead to ME/CFS, which is the chronic fatigue syndrome from, which can also be caused by viruses. And, that can be lifelong.
This is why I've been so cautious around people saying, hey, look, it's COVID, you get it and you're done. Yeah. It's so new. We just don't know.
Yes.
And I mean, I've got friends and acquaintances that have dealt with various chronic illnesses in their life, and we're just not set up to deal with it. I don't want to roll the dice on something like this and deal with something like brain fog, which would take me out of my job for an unknown period of time.
Exactly.
It really concerns me with the rush to get back to normal.
Yep.
That people are rolling the dice on this.
Yeah, and just to reflect on that, really honing in on this isn't a cold or a flu. There's this virus attacks our vascular system, our blood vessels. So when that happens, you're getting widespread inflammation, what we call systemic inflammation. It's upsetting our blood flow. It upsets the oxygenation of our organ. Basically, it affects everything. That's why if you look at some of these studies, the symptom spectrum can be 200 types of symptoms, all
Wow.
all causing crazy, what we call a crazy constellation of symptoms. But the top ones there are this debilitating fatigue and neurodysfunction, where you'll forget something, or you can't gather your thoughts. And absolutely, this is going to affect people in their jobs and their general livelihood, their engagement with their family relationships. And so absolutely echo that. It's a really rough place to be in this pandemic, where there's this widespread ideal that we'll get Omicron, get over it and move on. This virus is not like the other ones. This does silent damage in our body, and we need to, rest through that while we don't have the answers. And, that's where my research is coming in, is that we want to urgently understand, the markers in the blood. So proteins that are circulating that show us that your blood vessels are damaged and that your inflammation's ongoing, so that we can, feed that through to treatments and reverse this condition. And that's where the real urgency is that we want to understand this condition more so we can help people reverse it.
I like, when my kids were growing up, they learnt by song a lot, and it was a good way for things to stick in their head. I'm wondering, after hearing you talking, that we should go back to that old kids poem, "Here Comes Another One, Not Like the Other Ones." That might be a better advertising campaign, because what you're saying is exactly it. I mean, just to jumping back to what Chewy just said, and also something that was said before, you were talking about kind of the infection and the death rate has been where all the media attention has been. But this is what we've been saying for the whole time. This is, I think, our 5th or 6th weeks. We haven't been around for long. But what we've been saying the whole time is, those stats don't look into the number of people and specifically around long COVID. And also it made me think, when you were talking about it's new, like the same people who are refusing to get the vaccine because it's too new are the ones who are making lifelong decisions on a virus that is also too new. So it's that we pick our own path, I guess. It's that thing that they're not. Fair enough. If you don't take the vaccine and your argument is too new, then you shouldn't be making any lifelong decisions based on a virus that is also too new. I did want to ask you though, this research that we've been talking about that came out yesterday did talk about hospitalized people. What about those people who aren't hospitalized? What is your research showing about non-hospitalized people when it comes to long COVID?
Yeah, so that's another one of our frustrating points when some of the studies come out, because we're still seeing people say, or it's still getting reported that you've got a higher chance of long COVID if you're hospitalized. It's linked to severity, and that's just not true. So you have to understand that from these studies that it's how a study's designed. So people who are hospitalized, it's an easy way to recruit onto a study. So therefore, that study suggested you have quite a high chance of long COVID. But when we work, all the work we do with international engagement with the large patient groups, like the UK alone has over 1 million people with long COVID, right?
Wow.
And the large percent never went near a hospital. It's not to say that it's mild. I hate the term mild. It's offensive to someone who was in bed for a week, feeling near death's door, to say that was mild. They just didn't get serious enough to go to hospital. So we know that that's the case. We also know people who have long COVID who barely recognize that they were infected. This is a virus that has the ability to evade the immune system, especially Omicron. Our vaccinations are critical to shut it down because our body reacts really quickly to get rid of it, but it's actually not perfect. Omicron evades the immune system. So that's why there's loads of us getting symptoms from getting infected. And if you have symptoms, that gives you some form of risk of long COVID. And that's why it's also frustrating when some of these studies are extrapolated. So whether it's hospital cases, therefore it gets extrapolated that it's only severe cases, or, a study that says vaccination protects against long COVID. But again, that was Delta. We always need to be in the moment and what is happening to us now. Just like if a new variant comes along, we won't have data on that either. So, it's a precautionary approach. If you can not get this virus, that's where we want to go with this. And in the same vein, if you get Omicron and you're like, "Oh, that was rough," or "That was easy," you're going to be susceptible to the next one. The immunity from exposure to Omicron is not bulletproof, nor with the vaccination. So we're sort of calling for from a national perspective, what's next? What is our path through this? What does that look like? And I think a big part of our future needs to be mitigation, like as in masking, clean air, and all that sort of stuff, not just a magic injection and therefore you're bulletproof, because we need everything. We need to protect vulnerable people, and so it's kind of a what's next. Where's our path through this? What happens when the next variant comes along?
Hey, look, just echoing what you've said about not getting it as the best. I 100% agree with you. And I guess speaking back to what Chewy said earlier as well, about people saying, let's just get out and get on with it. And other people kind of saying everyone's going to get it. At the moment, about 10% of the country has had it. 500,000 cases, yeah? And I think Michael Baker said in the last couple of weeks, probably only half the number of people who will get it have had it. Now, that means maybe 1 million New Zealanders. That's 20% of the population. That means we should have an expectation that 80% of us don't get this. So actually, if you look at the numbers, and look, you're the doctor here, Dr. Brooks, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you look at the numbers, our expectation should be we only have a 20% chance of getting this. We should be trying to accept the 80% chance that we have an 80% chance that we won't, and try and be in that sector rather than throwing our hands up in the air. And for some reason, the narrative going around that everyone's going to get this, so let's just get on with it.
Well, you have to remember with those numbers and the narrative there is that the virus requires a vector. It requires a human, right? So to be part of the 80% who don't get this, you might be the lucky one who goes, "Woo, I'm vaccinated, no mask, look at me," and you get you get exposed and you didn't get it, and great, that's you're in that category. But really, to be part of the 80%, that's not going to be me. I'm going to be in my mask. I'm going to be being cautious to not get this virus. So yeah, it's a numbers game for some people who get exposed, don't get it. And we know that, like everyone knows a family where the virus has come through the door. Some people get it bad, some people don't get it, some people don't test positive. That's the crazy thing about our immune systems. If we could do a test and tell you who's got a bulletproof immune system and who does a great job of it, amazing. But we don't have those tools, because the immune system is ridiculously complex, even for those of us that study it. We're just like you guys, we're like completely complex beings. So yeah, I totally agree in the context of we don't have to be in the group that gets this, but for 20% of the population to get it, you have to be that vector that is exposed. You have to be out there and either you have to be exposed to be in that group. Equally, to be in the non-exposed group, you're either lucky or you're protecting yourself.
All right. I've got one more question for you, but Chewy, you've got anything else you want to wrap with Dr. Brooks before I ask my last question?
I was just thinking how remarkable it is that our initial advice going into this of maintain distance, wear masks, is still a really important linchpin of keeping ourselves safe.
Mm-hmm.
How good is that?
Yeah, exactly. And But this is, I guess, one of them. We're in a precarious point here in the sense that winter's knocking on the door, right?
Winter's coming.
We're welcoming in people through our borders soon. We're going to welcome back all the other great germs that we've kept out. So we're going to get the flu season. We're going to get the RSV season. We're going to get all those things through our borders again. And so and that's going to be even worse, right? We're going to be like, have I got COVID? Have I got the flu? What's happening? And at the same time, you're going to get this barrage. So if we do have, if we start normalizing wearing masks and wanting to not get sick, then that's only a good place to be, right? We want to normalize this. And it's disheartening hearing in some countries where their restrictions have dropped so much that then you get attacked for being protected. You don't have to wear a mask anymore, right? Is kind of the tone of what's happening. Like, oh, look at that weirdo. They're wearing a mask. They're crazy here. So I really hope that doesn't come to that here in New Zealand, and that we're proud to protect against infection, that we're proud to stand up for our health, because, this Omicron is experimental, because we won't see a study like that was launched yesterday, or, we won't see the answers about what's happening with Omicron. The only way we get answers at the moment is through our direct links, to international research groups who are telling us what's happening. Or, my inbox is flooded at the moment of people post-Omicron. We're hardly post-Omicron, right? We're in Omicron. And these people coming forward are 1 week, 2 weeks out, or 3 weeks out. And, and that's not even the definition of long COVID, but I'm certainly welcoming, contact to me so that we can track people. So we here in New Zealand can understand how many of you have, a rubbish time, you're fatigued, you can't think straight for a month. And then you're like, I rested my way through that and now I'm good. We need that information. We really need to understand. So therefore we can learn from that, right? So, that's why it's a tough message of resting. And it's like, what does the resting mean? But, some people will get the virus, have 24 hours and go, whoo, that was fine. I nailed it. And that's cool. We're not about scaremongering saying that everyone's going to get long COVID. It's just knowing that this condition's there. And if you feel those fatiguey things, if you're shortness of breath, if you can't walk to the letterbox and back and you're like, hey, this is fine, listen to that, because this virus is not a flu. It is not the cold. It has done some damage that needs time to heal.
You've kind of just started to answer my last question. My last question was, we do talk about this a lot, and we do talk about what could happen if you get COVID when it comes to things like long COVID or worse. Mm-hmm. But what I haven't done yet, and maybe it's to the detriment of our content, is gone, what I don't want to do is freak people the fuck out who get COVID and then go, oh my God, I'm going to be sick for 2 years because of all the stuff we've been hearing about to do with long COVID. Mm-hmm. So I was thinking maybe we could just finish. You've sort of started it. You might have just done it entirely, but is there anything from your research that you can offer to people who either have had or will get COVID to actually bring, like, I'm a rational person and a logical person that will bring like a statistical understanding of, if we've got it, the chances are we're not going to end up with this, but still knowing it's out there.
Yeah, and absolutely right. Like, I know that it's always been a balance with, awareness that we don't want to scaremonger, but what we are hearing again on the international stage is the amount of, especially young people who are, hear the bulletproof, vaccination. Woo, I'm fine. When people are joining support groups with long COVID and they say, nobody warned me. That is heartbreaking, because we've been talking about this for well over a year and a half, and we don't want the person to not know that long COVID's a risk. So awareness is everything. So absolutely. And this has sort of been hard to articulate in some ways, especially, in the media, some of the stories I've been talking to, where, first of all, it was rest and you won't get long COVID, and then it was exercise and you'll get it. Neither of those two things are true. What you need, what happens here is that if you do recognize that, you did not bounce back after your infection, just, take a precautionary note that, take it easy. I've heard from athletes who would say minimum take 6 weeks off. Wow. Or and another one who is 2 years, never recovered, he said, I'd take 3 months off. If I could have my life back, I would have taken 3 months off. Because, and athletes are hard, right? Because, it's a mental, it's both a mental challenge and a body challenge to actually listen to your body and not go exercise. So it's a hard thing to put a number on. And because we don't have data on that. So absolutely. I guess so the message there is, if you get Omicron and, like I explained, it lasted 24 hours, you were a bit rubbish, but you don't feel a thing, you're just back to normal, then, you're probably fine. And we know, that there's a large proportion of people that's the case. So when you start to sort of enter that, the sort of symptomology where you were sick for a week, your body, you didn't go to hospital, so you fought it off. But you did fight it. So the virus was in you. It was causing some damage in your body, nailed it, kicked it out, and you're recovered. But it's those people that really need to be cautious and listening to your body. And again, I will say from previous waves, we know people recovered from that. It may have taken 3 months, 6 months, or a year. It's more I think some of the earlier studies sort of suggested that if you get out to 12 months and you're still, not recovered and your symptoms start to escalate, because it's cyclical as well. It can be, you could have various symptoms and then suddenly something else weird starts happening. So, and that's sort of this long-term, the long part of it, if you like, is that as time progresses, it's not just that you're slowly recovering, you're actually getting worse. So, and we believe that's going to be a lower percent. Can't give you a number on that with Omicron, but like the World Health Organization sort of predicted that beyond 3 months is 1 in 10. But then there's no study on Omicron. We hope that's lower. We hope that, but even 1% of 500,000 people who are infected is a large number. And we just want that awareness to look out for those symptoms, reach out to us, come be part of the research, be a guinea pig, sign up and sort of, track what's happening in your blood and all that sort of stuff so that we can help, the next phase, understand, the next variants and, help us understand more what's happening with Omicron. So yeah, it's a difficult one, but it's definitely not a scaremongering thing. It's awareness. People beg to have known this in 2020.
Yeah. And it's a little bit like you hear stories primarily out of America about people in hospital wishing they'd been vaccinated and all this sort. So we don't want, no matter what disagreements we have with people who may not want to be vaccinated and stuff, my rationale and reason to want to lead horses to water is actually I don't want people to get sick and end up in hospital and die or get longer. That's honestly even though I've had some interactions with the so-called anti-vaxxers, like I don't want you to get sick either. Like I really don't want you to. And when I see a group of people in parts of Dunedin and COVID is going through them all and they're all anti-vaxxers, I'm just like, dudes, I mean, I hope you have a mild case. And the problem is if they have a mild case, they're like, see, I told you it was nothing. But I'm like, I'd rather you could say at the end of it, I told you so, and you're okay, then you got incredibly sick because you weren't boosted. Hey, we're going to move on. I wanted to say, though, because you mentioned athletes, it was both good and bad to hear Beauden Barrett from the Auckland Blues. We're not going to talk about the game between them and the Highlanders, but Beauden Barrett, it was said by the announcers that he was, quote, struggling to bounce back from COVID. So it was good to hear them say that he was struggling with it and he wasn't to full peak. But I also thought the idea of saying he was struggling to bounce back implies, most people just bounce back. So it was kind of a bob each way on that one. But mostly I wanted to say, you were talking about your email inbox being full. Thanks for answering our email today. Yeah. And making yourself available to have a chat with us on Big Hairy News, as we call it. And Dr. Anna Brooks from the University of Auckland, thanks so much for joining us. We really do genuinely appreciate your time today.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Cool.
All righty. We have to look, I said I was going to, we have to look up the Jada Pinkett Smith thing, don't we? You guys can talk while I look it up because I don't know what she said.
I bet it's expensive.
I bet you what happens is you both hang up and leave me here searching by myself while I'm looking for it.
Yeah, so I've just been doing some work in the background on future interviews, but I was looking at Jim Carrey, trying to get him on the show, obviously, because he's
Jim Carrey.
Because he's like my favorite dude ever.
Yeah, I'm loving this so far.
Yeah, we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, he's.
That's it.
This is a season for healing, and I'm here for it. Can I say so vapid? Right?
Can I say this actually is a season for mea culpas and apologies, and after that, there may be a season of healing. I thought about this again today, and I thought the thing about it is, I mean, Chris Rock is going to be a better person than me, but if that had been a situation where that was now on the internet forevermore, unless Will Smith could go and get all of that imagery taken off the internet, I'm not ever going to forgive him for this. I might put it behind me, but that, for want of a better word, bitch slap, is going to be on the internet forevermore, damaging, in my opinion, Chris Rock's reputation. And no matter what they say now, you can never take away what crime was perpetrated on the day. To be black and white. Some comments that have come in. This is through the whole show. Crazy was talking about the plastics, microplastics or nanoplastics. Compostable bags are promoted and made with starch, but in reality, there are microplastics held together by starch.
Oh, that's interesting.
They break down quickly in sunlight, so buried in a pile of compost much slower. I guess we will always say allegedly because I don't know the science behind that. Gareth was talking about Duncan Garner, expert on everything, why I don't listen to talkback or watch TV. I think this is one on the liquor one. This is the same thing. That's not that easy getting a liquor license. Many applications and renewals are contested by councils now. I agree with you, Pat. Advertising and marketing do work and leaves the brand association. And then Gareth also says brand awareness is worth billions. So yeah, I'm interested about the idea that Duncan Garner thinks advertising doesn't work, but there you go.
Yeah, it was funny. And I remember when the week that Today FM started, there was a glowing review about it in RNZ, an opinion piece about how it was like so refreshing. They were talking about like they were sharing healthy recipes, and as opposed to talkback radio, which talk about mandates and cycleways, right? It specifically said that. But today we saw Today FM bringing up the cycleways. You got to bring up the cycleways.
I mean, the thing, it annoys me a little bit because I started wanting to get into broadcasting because of talkback, and it was because someone was doing an alternative form of talkback. They were doing a youth talkback program, and I loved that idea. And then whenever we do talkback, it tends to skew conservative a lot of the time, but there's controversy that you can talk on, or there's difficult topics that you can talk on both sides. You should always look for a hole in the market. ZB's got their pigeonhole. This new one can be something else. And it just, I'm very wary when you see the same faces on it. Your Duncan Garners and your Mark Richardsons and Polly Gillespie.
But on that, they do have some injury. Polly Gillespie's never done talk, right? So that's going to be an interesting dynamic there. And I think Tova's a really interesting mix for the morning. She's young. Hearing that first, it was the first day. Again, we're not passing commentary on the overall station, but it sounded very different. And I think the way that she will be successful is to go back to her kind of combative thing. And that wasn't the style they were looking for at the start. I wonder if what will happen is they will figure it out over the next few months, what their style is. And I wonder if their style will end up being back to what it once was. Because, of course, the big question about Today FM is that News Talk ZB kind of has that, right-wing conversation snatched up, and RNZ has sort of the left-wing conversation. So where is actually Today going to fit? Because if they stay with that sort of left-wing open, let's talk about recipes and stuff, that's already been covered by a station that has no advertising. So, so you know what I mean? And if you do want that kind of right-wing, I used to talk about, this feels like when I did night times, this feels like another 3M night. And I'd say that with my tongue in my cheek, but what that meant was, seems all we're going to talk about tonight is Muslims, Maoris, and migrants. When I was working on ZB, my boss told me to stop saying that, but I still think it was quite funny. Good. It seems like we've got a good 3M night going here, guys. Let's get into this. And if you want that, you've got the place to go. And that's probably why I was the most complained about host on News Talk ZB, which I got told by the same boss as well, who was actually the boss who's now running Today FM.
Revolving door, right? I mean, you'll know better than me, Pat, but they're not loyal to their ideologies, right?
I remember specifically the what's his name leaving Team New Zealand and going off to Italy, and people were like, "Oh, traitor! Oh, this, that." And I'm like, dude, if someone offered me 3 times the money to go to the opposition, I would be fucking gone in a heartbeat.
Yeah,
he was offered 10 times the money.
Yeah. This is why I tell my students that, like, I'm often more trustworthy of partisan, antagonistic journalism than so-called objective journalism.
Yeah. Anyway, I think that's one of the things we get to do here, George and Chewy. It's that we don't have any skin in the game with anyone, really. There is a chance, and there are conversations going on right now with some media outlets that they might decide to carry us. But I can tell you right now, and I can make this promise, that we will only partner with anyone or platform with anyone if we continue to be independent. You know, we want to talk about what we want, where we want, which is why probably we'll never work for someone like MediaWorks or NZME, because we want to be able to say Duncan Garner is a goofball, and this is why his argument's terrible, which wouldn't fly very well on a MediaWorks brand. And we want to be able to say, you know, Mike Hosking's right-wing talking points are ridiculous for these reasons, which probably wouldn't flow very well on an NZME, you know, kind of a platform. So we may never partner with someone, but if we do, the only reason we ever will, or the only condition I will ever have, is that we need to stay completely autonomous and independent of, you know, sort of editorial input, which does lean us towards a couple of specifics, which I'll keep under my hat. But, you know, it may happen one day. And it may not. And next week we might be saying, hey, you people are listening and watching, remember Patreon? Isn't that a lovely thing to get involved with? All right, guys, I think we should wrap it up. It's been an interesting show. Thank you, Chewy. Appreciate your input today and yesterday, and I guess we'll hopefully maybe catch you a day or two next week, maybe.
Yep. No
and
worries.
George, thank you again for the work. Now, tomorrow it looks like we've got Robert Patman coming up talking about China joining up with some Pacific Islands, and there's some concern around that. We've also had confirmed Chloe Swarbrick is going to be joining us to talk about the alcohol thing and the you know, that commentary we talked about with Duncan Garner today, and there'll be more as well. So check out tomorrow morning from 11 what we get into. And other than that, until we see you next time, everybody, thanks George, thanks Chewy, and hooroo to everyone who joined us today, and thanks for joining.